how's it going, Dr. Spin? I've got a record for you this week that I'm really excited about. I kind of have jumped protocols a little bit on this one. You won't find it in any of the previews. About 2 weeks ago, I discovered this and got me really interested and really distracted from everything else I was listening to. So the album is by a Nigerian synth artist named Hama, and it's called Houmeissa, which I believe is a pronunciation. I'm going to adopt that pronunciation for now anyway. So before we get into this album, Houmeissa, I have an assignment for you. Stop what you're doing, go to your Amazon Prime account if you've got one, and watch a movie called The Story of Sahel Sounds. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to do that. Go ahead. All right, you didn't do it, did you? It's okay. I didn't think that you would. Just put a pin in that, check it out for later, because this is kind of relevant for this guy. Sahel Sounds is a kind of a world music label run by this guy, and this movie that I suggest you guys check out is a documentary about him going to Niger, to kind of sub-Saharan Africa. Him looking for artists to kind of find and produce their music. It's a very interesting little piece of ethnomusicological work. It's interesting to watch the interviews with the guy because he seems to be pretty aware of some of the issues that go along with what he's doing, but he has a real interest and love for the music. And in the end, we're better for the work that he does because he's bringing a lot of very interesting work to the U.S. from this region. In the case of Hama, whenever he was discovered by this guy from Sahel Sounds, he was playing on this keyboard that had some programming that allowed him to kind of play in sort of multimodal scales and sort of do some microtone stuff. He could program it. There was a Yamaha synthesizer, had some beats on it, but got pretty proficient at programming it and was pretty popular locally for playing local gigs on his synthesizer. And not a professional guy, really. I mean, he was during the day, Hama at the time of the video, and perhaps still, I don't know, was a chauffeur for an expatriate, and I kind of did music in the nights and on the weekends on this keyboard. Somewhere along the line, towards the end of the Sahel Sounds video, you see him gifted a computer, a laptop, with a cracked version of Fruity Loops on it. And this is the genesis for this album, right? So somewhere along the line, I believe, his keyboard got lost in a fire. So during the course of making this album, he invested all of his time and energy in kind of learning how to use Fruity Loops, which is it's kind of a looping, sampling, sequencing program, and it's pretty rudimentary, really. I mean, if you look at things like Ableton, more contemporary stuff, those are pretty involved ones, and Fruity Loops is not that complicated, it's not that deep. But what he was able to do, just free to the keyboard, just looking at getting inside of a looping program and having a vast variety of just onboard sounds to use, really opened up a very interesting new realm of composition for him. I never really considered what a person raised in an African environment would do or think of when presented with looping software or a looping instrument, and kind of looping anything. So if you know anything about African music, traditionally, African music, especially in that region, is very cyclical. It's got this kind of By our ears, it feels kind of repetitive and not very melodically complex. But the thing about African music is the complexity of its rhythm. Now, it's not complex rhythm like in linear fashion, like we're talking about Venetian snares with weird time signatures and stuff like that. It's not that. It's the layering of the rhythm that's what's interesting. A general characteristic of a lot of African music is this kind of what we call hemiola pattern, 3/2, right? And that's the basis. For them, being able to play a rhythm that's 3/2 is as fundamental to African styles of music as like our major scale is to us. So immediately when you listen to Hama's music, these compositions that he has on Houmeissa, it's immediately noticeable that kind of African 3/2 aesthetic. 1, 2, 3. This is like, three sets of 2. 1, 2, 2. Or you can do it in 2 groups of 3. Or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, very often, those two rhythms are happening at the same time, all the time on the album. And that's that African aesthetic, that African 3/2 characteristic that I'm talking about. Very deeply groovy album, but it's not the kind of album that you would really kind of like dance to, at least in the traditional sense, like maybe in an African sense. If you watch the video footage of Hama playing or people playing in that style, there's a way that they move that makes sense with that kind of music. But it's not like, dance hall music, although it would be very interesting to see a DJ do something with a remix of some of these songs, because you could do a lot of really fascinating work by re-emphasizing different parts of the beat on these pieces. Definitely the synthesizer sounds that he's using are evocative of the 80s, really. Not really the 70s much, but the 80s. And so this is where it kind of gets it has the right to call itself a synthwave album. But I think it'd be a really big stretch to look at Hama, what he's doing, and say, well, he's trying to make a synthwave album. That's not his intention. That's kind of a branding thing, in my opinion. But it's smart. It's really smart branding, because people who are synthwave fans will love this album because of the sound set that it uses. But compositionally, it's way, way different than what you think of from a normal synthwave album. Synthwave music is generally very deferential to the 80s, almost to a fault, but here, this is only deferential to the 80s in that it's using those sounds. But this kind of music wasn't even really in the 80s accessible in this part of Africa. So it's hard for us to look at it and say, oh, he's being retro, because he's actually being completely present with what's available. But it sounds retro because the sound sets that he uses, because of the way our ears are set. Thing is, you see that very first video that's up, the Terror video, which is the kind of the official video for that song, and they're using all the synthwave tags. This is the kind of slightly psychedelic computer-generated graphics, and the rolling Tron grid at the bottom. That's all hallmark stuff for synthwave music, evocative of the 80s. But I seriously doubt that Hama is like, thinking about like this kind of the Tron grid when he's making this. It's a completely different approach from him, and it's a smart branding, smart marketing on the behalf of Sahel Sounds to kind of put it that way. Because put in the genre of synthwave, this album is incredibly innovative and fascinating. It's a fascinating listen how the Africanisms manifest themselves in this format, in the medium. It's sort of like how we would imagine the 80s if they were Afrocentric rather than Eurocentric. An Afroretrofuturism, if you will. That's a mouthful, but it's still an interesting idea. Like there's no way that this music could have happened any other way than it did, but it still has this referentiality to the past that we as Westerners lay on top of it. So there's a whole kind of nostalgic feel that goes along with this album, but there's also extreme innovation that goes along with it. And I really applaud the guys from Sahel Sounds for finding and encouraging this. And I would really, if you're even the least bit interested in what you've heard on this post, please go out and buy the record. Seriously, it's a guy that's, if you watch the video, at least when this started, it's a guy that's like, there's no flash or bang to it. He's kind of living in an African neighborhood, like you'd think it would be, like with kind of a huts and dirt roads and stuff. There's no like flash or bang to it. So, and this is an album that really deserves some attention, and certainly an artist I think that deserves some support. So, if you check out Hama, you can go to, he has a Bandcamp site. This is how I found out about him. You can also get his stuff through the Sahel Sounds website. But certainly, if you are interested in the artist, check him out, buy the albums, buy MP3s, buy CDs, whatever your format is, and support the artist. I think this would be an important one to do so for. So this is all I got for you guys today on this album. Of course, subscribe, all that stuff you know how to do. And I will be back next week. And until then, I'll catch you on the flip side.